This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
The sound of praise for your Sunday morning.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Introducing Reverend A.R. Bernard of the Christian Cultural Center.
Was the son of a preacher man.
And Rabbi Joseph Potasnik of Religion on the Line.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Now, on Talk Radio 77 WABC, here's the Rev and the Rabbi, where faith matters.
Good morning, I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, I'm going to ask you a question. Not of a theological nature, but just maybe want your insight. You watched the game, the divisional playoff between Kansas City and Buffalo, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Every time Kansas City scored a touchdown, the camera focused on a booth. There was Taylor Swift, right? Every time the Bills scored a touchdown, I saw some guy who was bare-chested with war paint screaming. I said, wait a minute. What happened to equality here? We got Taylor Swift, this guy. So I don't know who's in charge of those decisions, but obviously it worked well for Kansas City.
Yeah. And we were hoping. Look, I'm not. I have my brothers. You're a Boston Patriot fan.
But I'm a New York fan also. If Boston's not in it, I'm New York. Yeah.
Okay. Because we were all looking forward to a potential Bills win. I mean, they were moving it, and it's tough. It's great that they got this far. But it would have been nice. I mean, New York would have been on fire.
And it was very classy the way Josh Allen, the quarterback for the Bills, spoke about the coach. Is it Sean? Is it McDermott, I think? The way he spoke about the coach in this loving fashion.
Yeah.
It was beyond disappointment. It says, we are so fortunate to be coached by this man. And I said, wow. Here you are inside, you're hurting. At the same time, you recognize that you have a great coach. That is a tremendous quality. So, and both teams. And of course, at the end of the game, you had Mahomes, right?
Yeah.
And his first comment was, glory to God.
Glory to God. Yeah, and that's, look, he and his wife and family are evangelical Christians and, very committed to his faith. And we saw that, I like Josh Allen, man.
Yeah. But so I ask you, if KC lost and the mic then went to Mahomes, would he still say glory to God?
He still might. Yeah, no, he still would. I think he still would. Yeah. And he understands.
He better. I mean, I think those who have faith realize that God is larger than the game.
Yeah. Win or lose, right. we thank God. That's the way it should be. Unfortunately, in this divided America, everybody's not thinking that way. Yeah. Hey, glory to God if we win and we are quiet and wait for our.
And we're angry. Some are angry. Like, how could God do this to us? How could He let us down this way?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So we have some call it a kerfuffle. I'll call it an argument. Vice President J.D. Vance, His Eminence Timothy Cardinal Dolan. Want to talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's real. The Cardinal clap, like they say, now young people, I learned this from our grandchildren, the Cardinal clap back. Vance, our Vice President, Vance, made a comment about the Catholic Church and its role with immigration, and said that it's about the money. I think numbers like $100 million in funding for the work that Catholics do around immigration. But the reality is that's that's little money compared to the actual work and the efforts that are done, by Catholic charities, by the Catholic Church organization. So I understand that the cardinal felt compelled to say something, and I have to agree 100%, because think about the donors, the people who believe in what's being done and trust the Catholic Church to get it done. So the cardinal put out a statement, thanks to our generous benefactors who understand the importance of these individuals. And if Catholic, schools were doing so well, we wouldn't have seen the closure of so many Catholic schools over the last, 2 decades.
And I think the cardinal challenged the vice president. Well, why don't you audit the books? If you feel that is your reality, come see our reality.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, we always have this, we politicize. So those who like J.D. Vance, he's right. The other side, well, it's a cardinal, he's right. Why don't we look at the facts before we start deciding who's right, who's saying what that we agree with? We don't know all the facts. And I think that's one of the problems today, especially with social media, that allegation becomes truth, a point of view becomes the point of view, and there is no chance for having a real exchange of thoughts, difference of opinions, and then make a decision. We resolve it without discussing it rather than discussing it without resolving it.
Yeah, when you take fiction, and present it as fact, all of a sudden it becomes truth. And I think that's a dangerous place for us to be in. And the reality is, when it comes to the migrant situation, I don't know, outsiders of New York City or New York State understand that we as clergy and houses of worship, we were approached by government, whether it was the mayor or the governor or even the federal government, and asked to help. What could we do to come alongside and address the migrant issue? And some houses of worship were actually taking migrants in off the streets and trying to house them, those who were equipped to do so. So the cardinal also pointed out in his radio broadcast that it was response to government request that we come alongside and help in any way we can, and we believe that that's our responsibility. In our various faith traditions.
It's rooted in our theology. It doesn't say take in the criminal. So I think one of the problems with the discussions today is there's no nuance. When we look at the whole immigration issue, well, we have, people who commit criminal acts, and they should be punished or expelled, however you want to define what the punishment should be. But what do you do with all of those who have been in this country? Yes, overstayed the visa, illegal, but they pay their taxes. They give back in their own way. What happens to them? And you don't get a definitive answer from somebody. Well, we're not at that point. That's not what we're going to do. I don't know. But it's worthy of discussion. You got to look at it. Is there going to be a path to citizenship, or are we going to just take this position? You came here illegally, you're gone. But we don't reach that point because there's no nuance, no distinction. There are people, it's all or nothing. And again, we live in this climate where discussion seems to be something that is unnecessary.
Yeah, and the fact that, these are institutions that have been around for, in case of the Catholic Church, for almost 2,000 years, more like 1,500 years or so. But, they've been tried and proven in terms of the good works that they do. And some people want to point out, the bad apples, the bad actors that we all have.
And they should.
In our faith traditions.
Right.
And they should, but don't judge everyone and everything by those bad actors,
Yeah, by the way, we all have them. We have to own up to it. We're ashamed when it happens. You and I mean, let's confess, when we see something that occurs by a person of faith, a representative of a religious tradition, we call it and say, oh my God, this is horrible. What a terrible statement this is, because people use that to judge everyone. Oh, you see what they are, see what they do. Again, there's no nuance, there's no distinction. So let's have some rational conversations. That's what bothered me, by the way, about the bishop in Washington.
You're talking about Buddy.
Yeah.
Buddy. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea, what do you gain by that kind of in-your-face presentation? I know you can argue, well, prophetic voice, but if you want to really address the issue, we got to address it together. You know, we read in synagogues yesterday, Sabbath, that God says to Moses, come, let us go down to Egypt. Not let you, not me, us. And at some point, there has to be this opportunity for us to have a sane discussion. Disagreement is okay. It's warranted. But let's at least reach the point where we can disagree with one another and not lash out at the other where the other doesn't have a chance to respond.
Yeah, I think in the case of Buddy, it's a matter of where and when we express that disagreement.
Mm-hmm.
Do we leverage a platform like that, and call it taking our prophetic responsibility, as we as clergy do have? We have responsibility to speak truth to power. Or do we, wait for a different opportunity? And look, the reality is, no matter which way you go, you're going to be criticized. If she would have said, "We need to have a conversation," a separate conversation, offline, not in the cathedral, not as part of a worship service or anything like that. There are those who said, no, because if you have a conversation behind the scenes, that's where it stays, and it's never brought to the attention of the public to be addressed. That's a tough one. I'm glad we're revisiting it, because you and I talked about this last week, and I was saying I would have handled it differently.
Right.
But I will tell you, as I listened, because I went back and said, okay, let me listen to the prayer, and I just reviewed the prayer again, and I understand she was calling for mercy, and she began to indicate all of these different groups within our population, and the fear and the concerns, and the fear is genuine, Rabbi. I mean,
no, I get
all
it.
of us are dealing with people who are not here the way they're supposed to be, and they're terrified, and those who are here legally are concerned about family members who are not.
When you have an important issue, you can't afford to be behind the scenes only. I know there are some politicians who give that standard response. I'm working on this behind the scenes. The trouble is you never see them out in front. It's always so far behind the scenes, you have no idea what's going on. So I understand saying, look, let's have a conversation. And then you can talk about the conversation. And people learn from that you can have people on opposing sides who do sit down and talk to each other and try to find some common ground, because the issue is so serious. We have to find some solutions here. We can't continue on the past path. We need to find a different path, because obviously the immigration system in this country is broken. And you have people who've been killed by criminal members of the migrant community. Not all of them, obviously, but you got to address that too. You can't ignore it. So I think there's much.
Yeah, I was going to say, but isn't it always a challenge for us to balance the pastoral and the prophetic, to find the right balance between grace and truth, justice and mercy? I think every nation has a right to protect its borders, but at the same time, we have a tradition that says, look, the Statue of Liberty is there for a reason, right?
Yeah.
What does it symbolize? What does it represent as who we are as America? And it's not easy, and I'm careful not to armchair quarterback on these things, but finding the right balance is difficult, but it should be something that we do and not just take up on one extreme versus the other.
We have a saying amongst rabbis that a rabbi who doesn't have a critic is not a rabbi. Right? If you don't have people who take shots at you because they disagree, you're not a real public figure. You got to be ready for that. That should not dissuade you from having the courage to say what you want to say, but you got to pick the most effective way to do it. And that's where I think we can have some legitimate disagreement. By the way, she leveraged that prophetic voice to get on The View. So Right after that, she was on The
Yeah,
View.
but I don't know.
I don't know what the prophet. I don't know what the prophets would think of that.
Because
Yeah,
the critics of The View feel that they're far left
yeah,
and they
yeah,
don't
yeah,
really have
yeah,
a voice because
yeah.
one last report said none of them voted for Trump. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it was.
Does that qualify
I
you to
think
weigh
no. I
in?
think it
I
was
don't
one.
know.
I think it was one who did.
That did vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you called me shortly after the inauguration, and you were livid about something that And I've gone through all kinds of moods with you. This was angry, really
I was
angry.
upset.
Yeah.
I was upset. Yeah.
That's a nice way of saying you were angry.
Look,
I was upset. Yeah.
Beginning with a Cardinal, I'm not upset with the Cardinal, but I watched the inauguration, and the Cardinal did represent it well, doing the invocation. Then Franklin Graham did pretty much what I expected, and that was to elevate and support Donald Trump, President Donald Trump. I get that. And then you had all the other speeches, but then we get down to the benediction, which is the closing prayer. And they introduced a Reverend Lorenzo Sewell from Detroit. And I'm careful. You and I have to do invocations and benedictions. We've done many over the years. And, we're judged by, content, style, all that kind of stuff. People don't realize that takes time. It's not just, a simple prayer. So sometimes prayer mixed with commentary, but he gets up and he goes into a role, and he takes the last half, and this was problematic. He took the last half of Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech, and verbatim, he begins to preach it. I will say, as though it was his own words. There was a lot of hand and arm motion and movement. It was a theatrical presentation. You could tell,
Like
he was
mimicry,
given a
right?
platform.
So,
That's the problem. It was mimicry, and I will tell you, it went virtual. And there were some who really didn't understand the problem with it. But in the community of color, I mean, they were livid. Black leaders were livid because we felt that it just, it cheapened, tried to cheapen Dr. King's speech. It did not give honor, at least say, in the words of, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
And also, we know the words. We've heard the words. The day was devoted to the words. Let's hear what you have to say, right?
Yeah.
I think, by the way, we've changed a bit of the format of the program where you and I, people want to hear what we have to say. We have guests, but we're going to devote much more time to having discussion between us because it is called the Rev and the Rabbi. By the way, the one correction I would make, when we were younger clergy members, Rev, we did benedictions. As we get older, we only did invocations.
That's interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And as we got older, we said, you know what, that's for the younger folk. We'll give a talk, we'll do a presentation, but of course, inauguration takes a whole different dimension. So,
and that's a big platform, Rabbi. That's a big platform.
Yeah.
It requires to be at your best and responsible. And I may get in trouble or criticized, but I think this young man was out of his league. He really wasn't prepared for that platform. And then, if I were to be gracious and say, okay, he was young, naive, didn't know any better. So maybe it seemed like a performance. No, I can't say that. It wasn't a performance. But then after he gets on social media and he starts selling coin memes, cryptocurrency, with his image on it and encouraging people to buy it and donate. So look, that tells me.
You wonder what some people are thinking when they do these things. But when you have a moment at a historical moment, you have a responsibility to say something that you feel is going to be impactful. And that's why I enjoy the president of Yeshiva University, Dr. Ari Berman. He was very good, as were many of the others. So, well, it didn't stop the inauguration. Yeah.
Yeah, and who knows the politics behind the politics?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
there are some incredibly gifted Black Republicans who and reverends who could have done a great job. But hey, look, who knows why these decisions are made? Right?
Yep.
It is what it is.
All
But
right.
you pull me into it. Now I'm going to get
well,
in trouble.
I had to listen to it.
Going to get the emails.
I listened to it all last week, and we have a guest coming on, Ronald Leopold, the executive director of the Anne Frank House, and there's much to discuss about Anne Frank and the exhibit that's now in New York, brought here from Amsterdam. They replicated the house of Anne Frank, so should be a good discussion.
Yeah, so stay tuned for more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on 77 WABC. We'll be right back.
Where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, I had the privilege of attending the opening of the Anne Frank House exhibit at the Center for Jewish History here in New York. That's located at 15 West 16th Street, and really an extraordinary exhibit, a must-see, and many people are coming to see it. And with us today is the executive director of the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, and that's Ronald Leopold. Mr. Leopold, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So talk about the genesis of the Anne Frank House there, where you are in Amsterdam.
So the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam opened its doors in 1960, May 3, 1960. But it was a difficult story in order to get those doors open that day, because in 1956, the Dutch had almost demolished the house. It was a time when people wanted to forget about what had happened in the past, and everyone was focusing on the future. Well, in the meantime, of course, the Diary of Anne Frank had been published. The first publication was in 1947 in Holland, and then in 1952 here in the United States. Became hugely successful play in 1955 on Broadway, which won all the theater prizes that year. And then in 1959, the film, the George Stevens film, The Diary of Anne Frank. Mm-hmm. So it was actually here in the United States, you could say that the origins are for opening the Anne Frank House to the public, while the Dutch, to be very honest, didn't much care about that place, didn't much care about the house, as by the time a minister of foreign affairs of the Netherlands wrote to an American visitor to Amsterdam who wanted to visit the house, he said, well, it's not open, sir, because to be very honest, to the Dutch, this house has no historical cultural value. This was 1956, the Netherlands.
I'm curious because Anne Frank was Jewish, of course, as you know, but her story has been interpreted and shaped by Christian perspectives. Because as a young Christian years ago, when I converted to Christianity, one of the early books that were handed to me was a Diary of Anne Frank. And at first, I thought she was a Christian until I realized what the story was about and how that played out. I understand that Dutch Christian resistance played a critical role in helping Jews like the Frank family hide from the Nazis. What do you make of this relationship that her story has with the Christian community?
Well, I think a very important element, of course, is the fact that many Christians in the Netherlands were involved in saving Jews and helping them to go into hiding. And until today, I'm attending ceremonies of the righteous among the nations from Yad Vashem, who are honoring those families. And of course, now it's second and third generation. But let me tell you a story about a pastor in the eastern part of the Netherlands. He's one of the main helpers in the Netherlands who help Jewish children hide in those areas, which is very close to the German border. And members of his community some of them, also maybe because of the nearness of to Germany, were members of the National Socialist Party in Holland, and nevertheless helped hiding Jewish children. Just because the pastors asked him to do so, and that's what they did, and that's how some of these children survived. And I think this is, when you look at these righteous among the nations, as they are being called, the ones who have helped Jews and go into hiding. What always strikes me is they are ordinary people. They are ordinary people. They are just following their moral compass that points into the right direction. They are doing what their pastor or whatever religious leader was by the time told them to do. And I'm always impressed by that, because ordinary people, you ask them for help that's what happened, right? You ask them for help. And just like the woman who helped the Franks during those 2 years in hiding, they just immediately say, of course I'm going to help you. Of course I'm going to help you.
I remember.
And you have to make that decision in a split second. There's no way that you say, come back next week.
Yeah,
it's fine. We'll see. We'll think about it. No, you have to do this in a split second.
I remember years ago, they were interviewing some of the rescuers, those who hid Jews, and they said, others didn't. Why did you? And they said, because it was the right thing to do. They didn't go to any theological explanation. They didn't go to any, this is what I was taught from generation. They just said, it's the right thing to do. End of story.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Rabbi, because one of the strong influences on post-Holocaust theology was Anne Frank's story. Many Christian scholars and leaders, reflected on how for centuries Christian anti-Semitism helped create an environment in which the Holocaust could happen. And her story had great influence on revisiting that history and casting a new theology around the Holocaust and the Jewish people in relationship with Christians.
Oh. Mr. Leopold, talk about the family that hid Anne Frank. Was it Geis?
Well, the family was in hiding in her father's business premises, and the woman who was her father's secretary, her name is, and I will pronounce it in Dutch, Miep Gies. So she organized the help. Her father had asked her if she would be willing to help them throughout the time that they were in hiding, and obviously they had no idea how long that would be. In hindsight, we know it was more than 2 years, but by the time they had no idea, and this woman, she said, of course I'm going to help you. Of course I'm going to help you. And so she and 3 other employees of her father, and together with 2 other people, have been helping them for those more than 2 years until they were arrested on August the 4th, 1944. And it's humbling when you hear her saying now, when she was sharing her memories and her, how she looked back at that time, and how it's heartbreaking when you hear her say, we failed. They were caught at the end. Well, she was obviously not responsible at all for what has happened, but that failure dominated the rest of her life. Well, of course, she was an incredible, courageous woman. I mean, she put her own life on the line in order to save that of others. So, and she's an example, as being we're not just a museum in Amsterdam, we're also an educational organization, of course, also the reason why we're bringing this exhibition to New York. And she's an example for these young people. Doing the right thing.
Yeah, you use the term righteous among the nations, and I think it was at the official Holocaust Memorial that over 27,000 individuals made up this righteous among the nations, individuals who were willing to give their lives in service of trying to save Jewish families. Do you present that? Because I haven't had the opportunity. I look forward to, but is that presented in the museum?
part of the museum in Amsterdam is dedicated about what we call the helpers. We tell their stories. They tell their own stories. They tell their own memories of what brought them to help them, and also two of the male helpers who were then sent after they were arrested to concentration camps in the Netherlands. Both survived, but it was really. And it's really an example for our visitors, and we present them in a space that you enter after you went through another space, where we present the people who made the other choice, the wrong choice, who have collaborated with the Nazis, and who helped the Nazis in order to make sure that they would achieve their goal of, as they call it by the time, making the country Judenrein, clean of Jews. So we offer the different perspectives in our museum of people collaborating, making the wrong choice, and helpers, incredibly brave people doing the right thing.
Yeah, we're speaking with...
Rabbi and I'm sorry for cutting you off, Rabbi. I'm just intrigued by this whole thing. Rabbi and I talk about the fact that a lot of the attacks were on Jews because they were Jews, whether they were living in Israel or outside of Israel. Even today, one woman comes to mind, if you're familiar, Edith Stein. She was a Jewish-born Catholic nun, and she was arrested and murdered in Auschwitz. Even though she was, born Catholic, she was still a Jew. So it didn't matter how she identified religiously, the fact that she was a Jew. And that's the question, why is it specifically the Jew that people go after? Rabbi?
Well, Mr. Leopold, I'd like to hear your answer. I think history paved the way for the Jew to be the obvious target, going back to early, the development of Christianity, seeing the Jew responsible for deicide. And then from there, it was the Jew who was the money lender, the Jew who was in control of the media, controlling society. I mean, any negative label you wanted, you could easily put on the Jew because of what was been said in previous generations. Mr. Leopold?
Yes, and then what was added to all that were, of course, the racial elements of this, and the so-called racial laws, the Nuremberg laws, that defined who the Nazis considered to be Jewish or not, regardless of their faith, their choices, who they were. And I think and then also talking about the exhibition here in New York, I think one of the most powerful elements that we are presenting here is a school class of Anne Frank, 1935, and is 6 years old, together with other 6-year-old children. The school class, a little over 30 children. 15 of them were Jewish, and 10 of them were murdered for the single reason that they were Jewish. The others survived by going into hiding and having the fortune to survive, weren't so fortunate to survive. But we know no one was safe, just for the very simple fact that they were being considered as Jewish according to the racial laws of the Nazis.
Yeah, with Edith Stein, she was born a Jew. And she converted to Catholicism. Right. None of that mattered. The fact is there was Jewish blood there, and because of that, she had to be destroyed. You know what I find interesting, Mr. Leopold, is that Anne Frank in her writings is very positive about the human spirit, that in spite of it all, she sees goodness in people. So I think she would want you to tell the story of the helpers. And she would find it inappropriate to hide that story because there are some good people. But here's this young person, a victim of hatred, the most heinous form of hatred, and yet she sees that humanity has elements of goodness. Where does that come from?
It's a very difficult question to answer, but I think part of the answer could be the way she was raised by her family, a German Jewish family, who was, lived for centuries in Germany, was a very educated, cultural family. And I think if you look at her diary, it was really a girl that embraced life. She was, and I think that's also the power of the diary. It is not just the book of a victim of the Holocaust, which he obviously was at the end, but it's also very much this a young girl full of dreams, full of hope, full of talent. She was an incredibly talented writer. And I feel that the disparity between this girl embracing life on the one hand and being so full of everything that makes us human, while at the same time knowing that that she was just one of 1.5 million Jewish children that were murdered for the single reason that they were Jewish. I think that disparity is speaking to us, and the fact that we can go beyond the immense tragedy of what has happened and still see the human parts of that. And that's also what we try to do in the exhibition here in New York, to humanize the victims, to humanize that school class, to humanize all those children. It's a tribute not just to Anne Frank, it's a tribute to all those children that were murdered for the single reason that they were Jewish.
I'm curious to know if there's any surviving family or generations beyond that tie back to Anne Frank, and are they involved in some way?
We, excuse me, we were very privileged to have a third generation here from the Frank family. These were the grandchildren of Anne Frank's favorite cousin. And they were here with us during the opening event of the exhibition, sharing their family memories, growing up in a family with such a huge legacy, while at the same time having this, engagement, and you see the way they try to shape their own lives in the shadow of that family history, and in their way, I think, being an example for young people, showing the engagement, inspired by history, inspired in their case and by their family history, in order to make sure they will do the right thing and they will serve as an example for others to do the right thing.
Mr. Leopold, you had a school there at the opening, Xavier, Catholic school, a neighbor of the Center for Jewish History. What do you want to accomplish by the exhibit? Are there going to be follow-up educational programs so you don't have people coming to an exhibit and then it's over? What's the continuing education process?
So what we try to do is to touch people's hearts. With this story, to learn, to invite them to learn about the past, but also very much to encourage them to learn from the past, to show them what human beings are capable of. It serves also as a kind of a mirror for us, for humanity, and make sure that they will become part of a solution in order to make sure this will never happen again. It is not enough just to learn about history. You should reflect on that history, and hopefully they will respond in their communities, wherever they live, whether it's their school class or their sports club or the environment where they grew up in, just to make sure that they will help us to make sure it will never happen again.
You served prior to your appointment to the Anne Frank House with the Dutch General Pension Fund for Public Employees. Talk about legislation regarding war victims that you were involved in implementing.
So there is a scheme in Holland from the Dutch government providing special pensions and allowances to World War II victims. And I had the privilege to be the director of that organization before I entered the Anne Frank House. And as different as these organizations might be, for me, it was actually a logical step, because what we do at the Anne Frank House is to remember and to educate. But the first thing you need to do, of course, is to take very good care of those who went through that history, who lived through that history, and who are trying to restore their lives, and who we all have the obligation to help them in order to make sure they can restore their lives after what was done to them. So I feel it was a logical step, after having done that for many years, then making the step towards the Anne Frank House, where we remember them, we remember their history, and where we try to educate young people about what has happened during the Holocaust.
So, Mr. Leopold, you have the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam. How would you describe the state of anti-Semitism in the Netherlands? I know there was some ugly incidents that took place. Was it right after a soccer game? It was in Amsterdam.
In Holland, like in other countries, we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism for a longer period of time. Before November 7, the incidents you just mentioned, before October 7, the attacks, we've seen it for a longer period of time, and not just in the Netherlands, also in other countries. We've very recently learned about what happened in Sydney, Australia. Mm-hmm. We feel that our responsibility is huge. We're working together with the National Coordinator of Combating Anti-Semitism in the Netherlands, and with our colleagues in the field and the memorial sites in the Netherlands. We're working on a law to make sure that it becomes mandatory for each and every school kid to go to a memorial site, or to the National Holocaust Museum that opened last year in Amsterdam, or to the Anne Frank House for that matter. We're producing educational materials and tools for schools. It's a huge challenge, but on maybe a bit of an uplifting note, we also see at the same time that the interest in the story of Anne Frank is rather increasing than diminishing. Knowledge, of course, is becoming a problem, but there's still a huge interest. And when I tell you that half of the 1.2 million visitors to the Anne Frank House are younger than 30, there are hopeful signs out there as well.
Mm-hmm. Rabbi and I talk often about how, as generations emerge and time moves on, things like the Holocaust, if they're not remembered, memorialized, they're soon forgotten. We know history becomes legend, legend becomes myth. What are you doing to connect to this generation, this story? You say there's an emerging interest. And is the Transmitting Anne Frank to Gen Z a documentary that you did for that purpose? Tell us a little bit more about it.
So I think one of the greatest challenges that we are facing right now, and we as Anne Frank House, but also the colleagues in the field, is this: how are we going to mediate the memory of the Holocaust as we go into the 21st century and towards 4th, 5th, 6th generations born after the war? They live in a different world. They grow up in a very different media landscape, and we know that. Like the classical exhibition you go to a gallery and you go to the next gallery and you go from one showcase and you go to another showcase and you look at an object and read a text about the object. It's not going to work. It's not working very well anymore. We need to do it differently. What we've tried to do with this exhibition is by using video, photo, animation, very different ways of presenting a story is also, in a way, our answer to that challenge. We hope that this will, and what we see right now during the first days that the exhibition is open, that it will appeal to those young generations. It will resonate with them. And then hopefully we will be able to set an example for how we can mediate the memory, how we can tell the story, and how we can mediate the memory of the Holocaust as we go towards new generations.
Ronald Leopold, Executive Director of the Anne Frank House. It's an exhibit you must see at the Center for Jewish History. As I mentioned, 15 West 16th Street. I know there was a tremendous demand for tickets, and so many young people are coming to see the exhibit. And if there's going to be hope for the future, I think Anne Frank would say, find those young hearts. Will translate into helping hands as well in dealing with this crisis. So thank you for all you've done. And we look forward to, I was telling the Rev, we got to bring the Cardinal and Reverend Bernard and a host of other interfaith leaders to see it, to talk about it, because it can't just be looking back. As you said, you learn about history, but you have to learn from history.
Right. Excellent. Great conversation. Thank you so much, Ronald Leopold, for being on the program. And stay tuned for more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on 77 WABC. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, I have to firstly say thank you to a good friend, Michael Glickman, who's the advisor to the Anne Frank House. And he's the one who made the initial contact to me. He says, you got to come down here and just see it, and hopefully you'll bring others with you. So I'm looking to bring you and other faith leaders. It's a must-see, and we have to bring others because if we don't reach this Gen Z, if we don't reach these young people, then what have we done? It's the story of the past.
Yeah, I was aware of the Transmitting Anne Frank to Gen Z, but I never saw the film. I know that Ronald Leopold is featured in it, so I'm looking forward to taking a look at it and to see how they're thinking to connect with this generation, with the younger generation, because that's the key. We've got to memorialize it. We've got to rehearse it, even when they don't want to hear it. I don't want a young person of color to say they don't have any idea who Rosa Parks is or who Martin Luther King is. I think it's just so important that we preserve that.
And also, we can't just present this lachrymose story. It's all about tragedy. We have to talk about those helpers, because if young people don't see that there were those who were courageous enough to make a difference, to try to save lives, then what message are we sending? If we expect young people to exhibit, commitment to humanity, to see goodness in people, then we have to tell the story of the helpers.
That's why I brought up the Christian involvement. There's a host of key Christian. We didn't even talk about Bonhoeffer and Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the fact that he died in the process, Lutheran pastor,
Right.
Maximilian Kolbe, Bernhard Lichtenberg. I mean, and the White Rose, who was a group of Christian students who distributed anti-Nazi leaflets. And, they were arrested for doing this. So there are individuals who, gave their support, and some of them gave their lives. Yeah.
When I was there at the opening, grandchildren of one of Anne Frank's cousins got up and read some of her writings. Mm-hmm. And I looked at the young people, and you could see that they were very taken by it. Some were, tearful because to see a young girl, 13, 14 years old, talking about tomorrow, when for her there was no tomorrow, and just saying, I see the goodness of humanity when she was surrounded by people who hated her, and the fact that she and others were Jewish. That's powerful. It's a powerful message.
That's why when I was introduced to the book, as a Christian, I thought she was a Christian or a Jew that converted to Christianity or something. I didn't understand why there was such a relationship with the Christian community and her story. But that was one of the early books that I was introduced to in my Christian reading.
In our respective traditions, there's no such thing as an innocent bystander. There are bystanders, but they're not innocent. because if you see the commission of a crime, you have responsibility to do something to try to salvage that situation, to try to save a life. So these people are to be remembered in the holiest. The fact that they're called righteous, right, is something that really gives them the special commendation for the selfless sacrifices that they made.
Yeah, I think it's important that we emphasize that when we think about morality versus ethics, ethics tends to be contextual.
Yeah.
But morality is universal. They're just rules of right and wrong conduct. Certain values that we should share as human beings. And I think that regardless of what faith you subscribe to, there is that call to that universal moral compass and set of moral standards and beliefs. So even the atheists believe that there's got to be a moral standard within a society.
Well, thank God for that.
Otherwise, there's going to be chaos.
I think
great conversation.
I think Anne Frank would be shocked and heartsick if she were to witness today what goes on various college campuses. To see people who are so-called educated or gaining an education in elite schools, as they're described, and participating in these heinous demonstrations, replete with hatred, is not something that she envisioned. So we have much work to do. Excellent discussion.
Great program. And we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. So we invite you to join us again next week, same time, right here on 77 WABC for another episode of The Rev
and the Rabbi.
It's Ocean Drive in Coney Island.
Ocean Drive is the only luxury rentals in New York with a spectacular ocean view. You wake up in the morning and breathe that ocean air. I'll certify that you're going to live 10 years longer. When I became successful, I wanted to live on the ocean. If you have worked hard, you deserve an apartment on Ocean Drive too. Go to oceandrivenyc.com and reward yourself.
If you're a policeman, fireman, doctor, nurse, or teacher, you qualify for a limited time offer at oceandrivenyc.com. Terms and conditions apply.